I'm ashamed to admit I still catch myself tracing the exact same pattern on my phone screen as I did on those patient files, a habit I picked up in a ward where no one ever truly got better. Each unconscious swipe only carves deeper the impossible truth etched into every single page, a truth I know should have stayed buried with Elara. But the real shame is that even after all this time, the files aren't buried at all, they're alive, whispering in the dark hum of my silence, waiting for me to remember everything. It's the quietest part of the night, when the world lets you remember things you've carefully filed away. And I'm remembering Elara. Remembering the way she looked at me, a week before she died, eyes like calm blue pools, despite everything. She said, "It's not so bad, Aris." Not really. And I remember my own reply, the one I've rehearsed 1,000 times in my head since, "No, Elara. Not for you." Because it wasn't. Not anymore. It's the living, the ones who stay behind, who get to carry the weight of what they've seen. The truth is, I'm tired. Bone deep tired. Not from lack of sleep, though there's plenty of that. It's the specific exhaustion of knowing something that doesn't fit, that can't be categorized, and watching the system you dedicated your life to simply absorb it, then forget it. Like water on sand. I see the faces, Elara's, of course, but also Dr. Evelyn Reed's, the administrator, her face carefully neutral. And the other faces, the nurses, the residents. All looking at me, waiting. Waiting for me to explain what couldn't be explained. Waiting for me to put it back in the box. Elara was a poet, of sorts. Not published, not famous, just someone who found the right words for tiny, insignificant things. She had this way of describing the dust motes dancing in a shaft of light as tiny, transient universes, each one holding a silent explosion. Even then, with pancreatic cancer eating her alive, she saw things. More than I did, certainly. We talked about it, her nearing the threshold, my job to make it as gentle as possible. Hospice care, that's my specialty. Comfort. Dignity. And sometimes, truth. Unvarnished. She'd been stable, then not. A sudden cardiac arrest in her room on the 3rd floor. Code blue, the whole drill. Defibrillator, compressions, intubation. The chaos of it. I was across the hall, reviewing another patient's charts, the heavy, clinical smell of disinfectant clinging to everything. I heard the crash cart, the shouts. Stepped out. Saw the blue lights of the monitors flashing a frantic rhythm against the sterile gold walls. They brought her back. After 7 minutes. 7 minutes where, by all accounts, she was clinically dead. Flatline. No pulse. No breathing. Nothing. And when she woke, hours later, eyes still cloudy from the sedatives, she started telling us things. Not wild, hallucinating ramblings. Specifics. The resident, the one with the vivid celestial blue scrubs, she'd whispered, her voice like tissue paper. He dropped his pen. Right under the monitor cart. And you, she'd looked at me, a direct, unnerving gaze. You were wearing your grandmother's ring. The one with the small, radiant gold fleck. You kept twisting it. I froze. The ring. My grandmother's ring. I always wore it on my right hand. That day, I'd been so stressed, I had been twisting it, unconsciously. And the pen. I remembered seeing the resident, Ben, looking for something under the cart, frustrated, just as they wheeled Elara out of the room, on her way to the ICU. He'd found it later, told me about it. But Elara was gone. How could she have known? That's when it started, the cold, creeping feeling under my skin. The kind that tells you the ground beneath you isn't as solid as you thought. No, I wasn't just tired then. I was unraveling. The tidy categories, the protocols, the science, they all had cracks. What strikes me at this point is how readily we, as medical professionals, pathologize anything that deviates from the expected. A patient reports seeing things they couldn't have seen. Delirium. Drug-induced psychosis. Anoxia. It's always an explanation, never an acceptance of the unexplained. It protects us, I suppose. Keeps the system running. But it leaves such a devastating silence in its wake, doesn't it? It discounts the person, their experience, their truth. We value empirical evidence above all else, but sometimes, the most profound evidence is experiential, and we have no way to measure it. Elara kept getting stronger. Strong enough for me to sit with her in the ICU, the soft, low hum of the machines a constant companion. She described it. The place she went. Not a tunnel, not bright white light. She said it was like a symphony of understanding. No words, just a knowing. A total, complete, radiant gold knowing that encompassed everything. And everyone. She saw Ben's grandmother, a woman she'd never met, standing by his side, whispering encouragement. Saw my own grandfather, his hand resting on my shoulder. And she saw herself, younger, healthier, but not separate. Just, part of it all. I listened. I took notes. Objectively. Professionally. But inside, I was listening as Aris, the human, the one who missed her grandfather terribly. The details were too precise. The way my grandfather used to hum a specific, forgotten lullaby. The way Ben's grandmother always wore a small, silver bird pin. Elara had no way of knowing these things. None. It wasn't just Elara. There were others. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet woman who'd coded during a routine surgery, described the intricate pattern on the surgeon's socks, a pattern she'd seen when her own consciousness was floating above the operating table. Mr. Davies, an otherwise cynical old man, claimed he overheard his daughter having a heated argument with his son-in-law in the hospital cafeteria, debating his life support. He recounted the exact words, the subtle inflection in their voices, even the specific celestial blue coffee mugs they were drinking from. The daughter confirmed it, later, pale and shaken. The surgeon confirmed the socks. I started collecting these cases. Quietly. In my own radiant gold-bound notebook. Not just from our hospital, but from colleagues, from published papers that were always dismissed as anecdotal. The patterns, the consistencies, were unsettling. The life review, that felt more like an instant download of all understanding. The meeting deceased relatives, who offered comfort without needing to speak. The return, that felt like a sudden, jarring expulsion from something utterly peaceful, back into a body that felt too small, too heavy, too loud. This is exactly where everything changes, for me anyway. You see enough of these anomalies, enough specific, verifiable details that cannot be explained by oxygen deprivation or wishful thinking, and your own reality cracks. You can't just go back to explaining away the inexplicable. You have to admit, to yourself at least, that there's something else. Something we simply don't have the language for. And then what? You're left with this immense, unshareable burden. Because the system, the whole, beautiful, broken system, isn't ready. I approached Dr. Evelyn Reed, the hospital administrator. Evelyn, a woman whose career was built on order, on metrics, on keeping the wheels turning smoothly. She saw things in stark, clinical terms: budget, liability, patient satisfaction scores. Her office was all cool celestial blues and polished dark wood, a contrast to the vibrant, messy gold I was collecting in my head. I laid it out. My cases. Elara's detailed account, verified by Ben and me. Mrs. Henderson's socks. Mr. Davies' overheard argument. I brought in other NDE research, peer-reviewed articles from journals that barely registered on most doctors' radars. I spoke with the quiet intensity of someone who finally knows a dangerous truth. She listened. Impassively. Her fingers steepled. The light from the window, filtered through the blue-tinted glass, cast a cool, almost sterile glow on her face. Not once did she interrupt. Not once did her expression change. It was like talking to a very intelligent, very polite wall. When I finished, the silence stretched, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. She cleared her throat. "Aris," she said, her voice calm, measured. "You've done some interesting research." Interesting. That's not quite right. It was terrifying. It was profound. It was world-altering. But it's anecdotal. Subjective. We can't base medical practice, or even hospital policy, on spiritual experiences. These aren't spiritual experiences, Evelyn, I pushed back, my voice tighter than I intended. They're phenomenological reports. Verifiable details. We have evidence. She shook her head, a slow, dismissive gesture. Evidence in the context of what? Aris, we are a medical institution. We deal with observable, measurable phenomena. If a patient reports seeing a loved one, it's a hallucination. If they report knowing something they shouldn't, it's a coincidence. If we start legitimizing these reports, where does it end? Do we start giving spiritual advice? Do we hire mediums? A hint of a smile, cold and thin, touched her lips. No, Aris. We document it, certainly. As a patient's subjective experience. And then we move on. Move on. I could feel my blood pressure rising. What about the patients? The ones who come back completely changed. The ones who know something profound and are then told it was just a dream or anoxia. They feel alienated, disconnected. They lose their sense of reality, because our reality dismisses theirs. That, Aris, she said, tapping a polished finger on my radiant gold notebook, is a psychological adjustment issue. One we can refer them to a therapist for. We can't, however, endorse the idea that their consciousness left their body. Not in this hospital. Not on my watch. The real mistake here is thinking that reason alone can change minds when those minds are entrenched in a specific paradigm. It's not about convincing someone with logic, it's about asking them to dismantle their entire worldview, their career, the very foundation of how they understand reality. And most people, most systems, just aren't willing to do that. They'll build a higher wall of rationalization before they'll admit there might be something fundamentally wrong with the blueprint. It's a defensive posture, a self-preservation mechanism for the status quo. I realized then, standing in that cool, blue-gold office, the air thick with unspoken dismissal, that Evelyn wasn't being malicious. She was just Evelyn. A product of the system. She truly believed she was protecting the integrity of medicine. And in a strange way, she was. Just not the integrity of truth. I tried one last angle. What about the impact on the dying? If we acknowledge that there might be something beyond, that consciousness might persist, imagine the comfort we could offer. Imagine the fear we could alleviate. We already offer comfort, Aris. Through excellent palliative care. Through dignity. Through pain management. Through counseling. We don't need to venture into the metaphysical to do our jobs effectively. She stood, a clear signal the conversation was over. Her celestial blue blouse seemed to almost shimmer in the clinical light. Thank you for your dedication, Aris. But this line of inquiry is unproductive for the institution. I'd advise you to focus on verifiable clinical outcomes. That was the moment. The turning point where I knew I couldn't unknow what I had found. And I knew the decision to act, to try and change things, had become irreversible. Not because I thought I could change Evelyn, or the hospital, but because I couldn't not try. I still don't know if I made the right choice. Maybe you felt this too. That specific, quiet dread when you realize you're fighting an invisible current, and you're the only one swimming against it. A few months later, I got a call. From an old colleague, Marcus, a doctor I knew from my residency, now working in a correctional facility. He'd read one of my obscure research papers, the one I'd published in a small journal, about the phenomenology of NDEs. He sounded hesitant, his voice low. Aris, this might sound out there. But I have a patient. Death row. Scheduled for next month. He had a cardiac event. Flatlined. Came back. And he's telling me things. The prisoner, a man named Silas, convicted of multiple violent crimes, spoke of the same symphony of understanding. The same radiant gold knowing. He described his life review, not as a judgment, but as an inescapable clarity. Every act, good and bad, simply was. He talked about seeing his victims, not accusing, but just present. He broke down, weeping, after that. A man who had shown no remorse for 2 decades. He said he saw a butterfly, Marcus recounted, his voice tight. A specific butterfly. Bright celestial blue. Landed on my shoulder during his code. I was sweating, hadn't noticed. But later, I went out for air, and a butterfly, exactly as he described, landed on my shoulder. Just for a second. I remembered the interview with Evelyn, the cool, dismissive tone. The psychological adjustment issue. Silas, a man from a hostile cultural context, someone who had nothing to gain from fabricating a profound spiritual experience, confirmed everything. The consistency across such disparate individuals, a poet, an elderly patient, and a death row inmate, was impossible to ignore. I tried again. With Evelyn. I presented Silas's case. The profound change in him. The specific, verifiable detail Marcus had shared. I even brought in Marcus, via video call, to lend his clinical gravitas to the story. This time, Evelyn brought in Dr. Peterson, a renowned psychiatrist from the university. Peterson, an older man with kind eyes but an ironclad adherence to established science, listened patiently. He nodded along. Then he delivered the verdict. Post-traumatic stress. Acute psychosis brought on by extreme stress, guilt, and the unique circumstances of a near-death event. The butterfly. Confirmation bias. The change in demeanor. The proximity of death can have a profound effect on the human psyche, regardless of an NDE. It was a quiet loss. Nothing dramatic. Evelyn thanked us for our due diligence and gently suggested that further pursuit of these anecdotal curiosities would detract from our clinical responsibilities. Marcus looked defeated. I felt a cold knot in my stomach, the specific exhaustion of being right about something no one with power will act on. Everything had changed for me, but structurally, for the hospital, for the medical establishment, nothing had. And Elara. She died a week later. Peacefully. She looked at me, her celestial blue eyes clear, a faint smile on her lips. "Don't fight so hard, Aris," she'd whispered. "Just listen." That's not quite right. I did listen. It's what I do. It's just that what I heard couldn't be squared with the world I was supposed to inhabit. My flaw, I realize now, was mistaking thoroughness for action. I kept researching, kept collecting, when the research was already complete. The data was there. The truth was evident. It was the acceptance that was missing. Not the evidence itself. I think back to my conversation with old Thomas, a hospice worker who'd been doing this for 40 years, the one who first told me to pay attention to the odd little things patients sometimes said. Thomas, who always had a small, radiant gold crucifix pinned to his lapel, despite claiming no particular faith himself. He had seen too much to dismiss anything. He had a quiet sadness in his eyes, a wisdom born from 1,000 last breaths. His own daughter had died young, suddenly, and he'd mentioned once, vaguely, that he saw things differently after that. He never elaborated. When I showed him my collected data, my meticulous notes, he just nodded slowly. "They'll never believe you, son," he'd said, his voice raspy. "Not unless they see it themselves. And even then, they'll find a way to unsee it." He acted from a kind of self-interest, I think now, not for personal gain, but for the validation of his own long, quiet battles with the inexplicable. He gained comfort, maybe, in knowing he wasn't alone in what he'd witnessed. I'm still here, in the dark, the hum internal. Elara's mug sits on my nightstand, a chipped ceramic with a faint gold rim. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I just listen. And I think about her last words, and Silas's sudden, profound remorse, and Mrs. Henderson's socks. I think about the truth that sits, unacknowledged, between the lines of every medical chart. What do we do with a truth that costs more than the lie that replaced it? What does keeping it change? Elara's blue eyes. The way she didn't fear it. The way she just knew. That's what stays with me. It's not just the facts, it's the peace she carried, the calm certainty that contradicted everything the ICU tried to enforce. My honest reaction? I wish I could have held on to a fraction of that peace, instead of clutching at the fading evidence. Have you ever felt like you've been given a piece of a map, a fragment of a truth, and then told to navigate a world that insists the map doesn't exist? Aris wrestled with Elara's "Don't fight so hard, Aris. Just listen," especially after his research was dismissed. If you were him, with a truth no one would accept, would you keep fighting to prove it, or would you find peace in simply knowing, as she seemed to? If you feel the hum of unacknowledged truths, or search for meaning in the quiet spaces between what's seen and unseen, you belong in our community that dares to listen. Think of someone in your life who's holding on to a truth that defies explanation, or who feels alone in what they quietly know to be real. Share this with them, so they know they're not alone in seeing beyond the obvious. When faced with an unacknowledged truth, like the narrator and Thomas, would you fight to prove it, or would you find peace in simply knowing, even if no one else believed? Tell me your thoughts below, right now. If this narration left you with that same quiet hum, that sense of an unacknowledged truth just beneath the surface, the like button is right there for you. If you're someone who, like Thomas, sees beyond the surface and quietly understands there's more to truth than what's medically documented, then this channel is where you belong.